What was your oh my? This person is a psychopath moment when meeting people. Story 1. A kid I went to primary school with invited me to his house after school one day. Not many people talked to him because it was a private school, and he was only a student there because his dad was a groundskeeper. I didn't want to go, but didn't want to be an idiot like everyone else, so I said yes, but I couldn't stay long. We went behind his house, and there were several bare spots in the grass. Some of them had a single stick sticking up in the middle, while others had a thin plastic tube poking out. He was very excited as he started digging up one of the spots with the hose poking out. He pulled up a jar with an expired baby bird in it. The hose was poked through a hole in the lid to let air in. He went on to tell me he likes burying things alive. Sometimes he seals the jar tight, sometimes gives an air hose, and even puts a little food and water in to keep them alive longer. He said you can't bury them too deep or you can't hear them trying to escape. Occasionally he would pour water down the tubes to drown the animal. I was 8 to 10 years old at that time. I'm 52 now, and it still makes me sick to think about that. Story 2. My friend found a psycho. Met her at the bar and ended up taking her home. She decided it should be more than just a one night and suggested a date the following weekend. He obliges. Their first date was meeting her parents, where she told them how they were going to spend the rest of their lives together, where they were going to buy a house, the names of their 2 children, etc., etc. He dated her for about a month, and after they broke up, she started stalking his friends, not him, his friends. She'd somehow find out where we would be and threaten us with lawsuits for ruining her life. Story 3. While walking my dog down a main road, on lead, a lady was walking her dog off lead. Her dog stopped in the road, causing cars to stop. She had no control of it. Her dog lunged for my dog. I asked her to put her dog on a lead. She said she will stamp on my dog's head and let her dog finish mine. I knew it wasn't even worth arguing with crazy, so I carried on my walk. She then set her house on fire 2 weeks later with her children inside. Luckily, they were okay, but yeah, madness. Story 4. Was chatting away with a guy in a pub. Seemed like a normal nice dude, got on really well. Some point in the conversation he casually mentions he's not long out of jail for torturing a guy. He never said torture, he said what it was he did to him. He slipped it into the conversation so casually as if he was telling me about running to the shop for a pint of milk. Never saw it coming. Asked around another day and confirmed he wasn't full of dirt. Story 5. I-20F was dating this dude, 23M, for a few months, and we were getting on really well. Then we both ended up having to move for our jobs around the same time. He wants to try long distance, so we do. We call most days and watch movies together in our off time. The time zones mess it up a little bit, but it wasn't too bad. Out of the blue one day, he just says he doesn't want to be together. I'm like, wow, okay. A little blindsided, but sure. So I start just going about normal life again and hanging out with friends, the normal post-relationship stuff. After about a month, he begs, like absolutely begs, to get back together. Movie-type stuff, sending flowers to me at work, sending handwritten cards almost daily across thousands of miles, and even bought me a ticket to fly out to see him. So I'm like, okay, whatever, I'll go and see what he has to say. Worst case scenario, I just fly home. So I got a ticket for 2 days after because I just figured I could head out if he was being an idiot. He picks me up from the airport and is basically how he used to be. Just telling me he missed me, and he regretted it as soon as it happened, and it was the biggest mistake of his life, the usual. So we stayed with his family because he's like, oh, please don't get a hotel. I already feel bad enough about the whole month. Just stay with us. And I just thought, hey, free room, I guess. Everything is completely fine for the first few days, and then I get this alert on my phone, and it's a hurricane warning and saying they're pushing my flight for 4 days later. I'm like, crap, I need to get back to work. I only took like 3 days. When he gets back to the house from work, I tell him about it, and he's like, oh, I know. We already started boarding up the windows. I was a little freaked out, but not too much because I guess that's normal for big hurricanes. So the next morning, he shakes me and wakes me up and tells me to come to the living room. I was like, okay. When I do, it's him, his 2 brothers, his sister, his mom, and his dad, people I have only met on this one instance, and he has a binder. They sit me down and each of them reads a passage from the binder of why we shouldn't be together, and why I need to move on, and he breaks up with me, in his parents' house, in front of his siblings, in the middle of a hurricane power outage. That because of the hurricane, I was stuck there for 4 more days with these freaks. Probably not the most psychopath person I've met, but this story is still just so strange to me. Story 6. At a party once I met a friend of a friend who worked as a nurse at a local hospital. She was of the sort who would sigh heavily and use the unique stresses of her job to bring her the attention she was looking for. She took the spotlight with pleasure and started talking about how hard her job was. When I asked if there were things she liked about her job, she beamed and explained that she worked primarily in maternity. However, her anecdotes had nothing to do with mothers or infants. She spoke primarily of how wonderful it was to be in charge of these women's lives. She explained how fragile they were in those moments, and how even after delivery she was the only one on the floor for hours who would be able to forecast if there were going to be life-changing complications. She absolutely glowed as she explained how these people's lives were in her hands. The conversation steered in other directions amongst party-goers, but she reclaimed it on the topic of high school experiences. She shared an anecdote on how she was rejected for an advanced choir position, and blamed it solely on the poor judgment of the instructor. Years later, she got to sing at the instructor's funeral. I'll never forget the pride she took in having control over other people's lives. It struck me as the most basic display of evil. Story 7. At a party in high school, or just after it, we were doing late-night juvenile things like Truth or Dare. I knew most people there pretty well, except the new boyfriend of my friend's sister. I'm not entirely certain how it came up, but he admitted to the entire group that he had finished a dog. We were drunk and high, but everyone sobered up with that. We were too young to know what to do with that information, but we all just shut up and quickly left the party. She broke up with him not long after. I can't imagine doing something that awful to a helpless animal, but admitting it to a group of strangers seemed downright sociopathic. I was glad to never see his face again. Story 8. She came late to our date, immediately ordered a drink and burger, then told me she was late because of a family thing. Before the burger arrived, she mentioned she'd have to cut our date short because she was having a family dinner. I was like, okay, all good. Then she told me that the craziest thing had happened where her sister met a dude on Tinder, and they ended up going to a family barbecue, and it ended up with them getting married. Before her burger even arrived, she said, "Wouldn't it be funny to pull a prank on my family? Like, you and I went to my family barbecue and let everyone assume we were really hitting it off, and they'd totally think we were gonna get married." I'll admit I'm also the psychopath in this story because I went. Good mashed potatoes. She spent all night introducing me as her future fiancé, and I had to take a Tinder break after that. Story 9. It was an Uber driver. My wife and I took an Uber down to the bars one weekend. Once he picked us up, I could easily tell he was on something. While we were crossing a bridge on the interstate, about halfway to our destination, he said, "Isn't it crazy that I could swerve off the road and finish us all right now?" I told him to get off on the next exit and canceled the ride. I also reported him to Uber, so hopefully nobody has to get in a car with that lunatic again. Story 10. After moving to a new city a few years ago, my best friend came to visit. We're both 30-something dudes. We were at a bar when a guy asked to sit with us, because there weren't any free tables outside. Fine. Being polite, we start talking to the guy. He told us he was a truck driver just stopping overnight in town, and at some point mentioned he was ex-military. From there, things began to get strange, but slowly, like the proverbial frog in water being brought to a boil. Not only was he in the military, but he had a brother, it might have been a twin, I can't recall, who was in the CIA, embedded in Russia. My friend and I also gradually got the sense that this guy was a little too interested in us. We eventually closed our tabs and decided to go to a different bar, but the guy stuck with us, telling increasingly tall tales about his time in the military. He eventually confessed that there was no brother. He was the spy who'd been embedded in Russia. What struck me was how, even though his stories got more and more ridiculous, his demeanor was deadly serious, if a bit overwrought, and the intensity was starting to make my skin crawl. Not only that, but he was starting to pick fights with other people at the bar, deliberately being belligerent. Over time, he started to radiate this menacing air that hadn't been apparent when we first started talking to him. He didn't get angry directly at us, but it was like he was demonstrating how scared he could be and suggesting we stay on his good side. Finally, he took me aside and slipped into a not very convincing Russian accent. Alas, he was never a spy for the U.S. He was a double agent, a one-man Russian sleeper cell. But he couldn't bear lying to me, he had to come clean. Even though we had open tabs at the bar, my friend and I waited until the guy went to the bathroom, abandoned our cards and dipped post-haste. Story 11. My ex-fiancé told me that if I were to get pregnant with a girl before a boy, he would push me down the stairs and make me miscarry so we could have a boy first as many times as it took. We broke up, and afterwards, he convinced me to talk things over with him. I got into his car, and he proceeded to calmly explain to me that it didn't matter if I took him back or not as he headed to the expressway. I asked him where we were going, and he remained absolutely silent. He started gaining speed, but the pitch in his voice never changed when he finally spoke and began a diatribe about our love and how we would be together forever, no matter how many people wanted to pull us apart, and no matter if I saw it yet or not. I again asked him where we were going, and he said a neighboring state, where no one would know or find us, with a very creepy smile, one that lives in my mind to this day but I can't recreate, all very calm. I had to call my mother, and she had to talk him down, beg him to bring me back home. Added bonus, when I was back home and refused to see him, he stood outside my family home all hours of the night and started singing songs to me over the phone about how he was going to burn my house down and finish everyone inside if I wouldn't go outside and talk to him. Story 12. When I turned down a guy while walking back to my car with groceries in hand, and when I got to my car, he pulled up next to mine and kept asking for a hug. I was like, no in my head, and told him I got a boyfriend, sorry. He left and I got in my car and kept an eye out to make sure his car wasn't following mine. His van was blacked out too. Not trying to stereotype cars, but just made it creepier, an all blacked out van. Story 13. When my ex's dad told the story of the time he put a wet towel on top of an anthill and then threw the towel at my ex. The wet towel stuck to her skin and she was immediately covered with ants, who bit her all over her body. He was laughing when he told the story, like it was the funniest prank. My ex told him that it actually hurt a lot, and it traumatized her quite a bit, and he just said, well, I'm okay because I'd already asked God for forgiveness. Story 14. I was seeing this guy for a few months. One night, we were drinking a few cans and told stories back and forth. He casually told me that a few years ago, he had gifted his former girlfriend a bunny, and after they got into some big fight, he let the bunny go outside and get chased and caught by a dog. He was laughing like it was the funniest thing ever. I was internally mortified, but I tried to play it cool until I sobered up and went home. We didn't last long after that. Story 15. Not when meeting someone. About a week later, I live in Taiwan. A bunch of us had a D&D game planned. One guy met a random dude in the bar who was interested, invited him to come along. When they got there, he was fine. Everyone was chatting. Once we started playing and he wasn't the center of attention, he started acting out like a child. This guy was a fully grown adult. I was asked to tell him to leave. I'm large and was a competitive fighter at the time. I declined because if I asked him and he tried to be a bum, it would have gotten physical. The guy that brought him along asked him to go. He was a fool about it, but when there were 6 of us telling him that it was time to go, he left. A week later, we found out that he had gone back to Thailand, where he lived, gotten drunk, and beaten his SO until she passed away. Part of me regrets not just telling him to leave and letting things get physical. If I had put that piece of dump in hospital, some poor Thai woman might still be alive. It's easy to have 20/20 hindsight. Story 16. A few months back, I ended things with a close friend. We had known each other since sophomore year of high school, so we practically grew up together. A little while into our friendship, he was very dependent on relationships, and when they would end, he'd spiral really badly. One relationship in particular made him absolutely crumble. I would help through the grief process, but it became intense, and his need for comfort became suffocating that even his own mother would call me to comfort her son. And if I had no time or just wasn't comforting enough, he would lash out and yell. Even called me once to show me how he ripped and stabbed his ex's belongings that were left at his house. At that moment, I began to see his true colors. One day we were talking, and I had brought up a past argument that I thought was funny. He got mad and lashed out saying, well, I didn't know it would hurt your feelings. It took me aback and just something clicked in me that I couldn't have a person like that in my life. Months passed and I'm approached by a friend who is friends with him. She ends up telling me that he has a police report and has been reported to his college for spreading pics of his ex and his mother. It was a shock. That's when I realized, oh no, he's a psychopath. Story 17. Went on a date once and she casually dropped how she finished her brother's hamster with perfume as a kid because she was mad at him like it was just a quirky little story to laugh about. Needless to say, I started looking for an exit strategy at that point. Story 18. On my first day of my new job, my coworker told me she traps spiders under glass cups in her bathroom and cranks up the heated floor to cook them alive. I'm not a spider expert, so I don't know if this would actually kill a spider. All I know is that she told me she'd leave them there all day and come back to them dead. Story 19. I met the new boyfriend of an acquaintance, and within 10 minutes of the conversation he was referring to women as pit. It was amazing how I suddenly remembered that my husband had requested I come help him with something. Story 20. An old friend of mine had a bad drinking problem, and he told me he drove home drunk. When I tried asking him about why he didn't see the problem with that, he said, "Why does it even matter if someone dies? There's 7 billion other people in the world." That's a wrap for this video. Make sure to leave your relatable story down in the comments. I would love to make a video on them. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.